Hey guys, it's Gage from PSP Kingston, coming to you guys on the national stream today to give you guys a bit of a workshop on strength training for beginners, important programming considerations for beginner lifters, folks who are new to trying to push their strength numbers, what they should avoid, what they should focus on, and then kind of some sample programming suggestions as we get a bit later on. This topic's been on my mind a while lately. With the shutdown of gyms, a lot of people are coming back to the gym and are at a time where they're really primed to make a lot of progress. Beginners they're in a bit of a precarious position. They are, by definition of being beginners, in a situation to make fantastic progress, probably the fastest, best progress they will ever make with regards to their strength. We often hear the label like beginner gains or new gains attributed to this period, and with good reason. However, on the other hand, many new lifters fail to really make the most of this time. They fall into traps that keep them from making the best progress they could. It's sort of like the phrase that youth is wasted on the young. Being a new lifter is sort of wasted on being a new lifter in a lot of cases. If you don't really have someone to guide you through it. Personally, I didn't really have that much guidance as a new lifter, and looking back, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. That's kind of the framework of this discussion, basically. If someone were brand new to trying to push up their strength numbers, what would I advise them to do? What would I advise them to avoid? Now, just to be clear, this is more in reference to folks who are new to training for strength, not folks who are new to any resistance training in general. For folks who are very deconditioned or who are brand new to exercise, kind of a program of higher reps, a bit of isolation, maybe even some dumbbells and machines would be fine for those folks. If they're, brand new to training or brand new to any kind of exercise. If you have a bit of exposure in the gym and you're new to trying to make a lot of progress, trying to progress your lifts, what should that look like? Is sort of what we're going to talk about today. For the purpose of this discussion, that's sort of who we're targeting this towards. Or maybe folks who have, because of COVID shutdowns, experienced an extended layoff and are returning to the gym trying to regain their strength as quickly as possible. What would I recommend those folks to do? So we're going to talk about a few sort of big picture points, and then I'm going to give you guys a bit of a suggestion in terms of nuts and bolts programming stuff. So the first thing I would do would be to simplify your program in every way possible. Simplify your exercise selection, rep ranges, rest periods, training days per week, everything you can, try to make it as simple as possible. As a new lifter, you're really learning the mechanics of the primary exercises in your program. You want to have as little interference as possible from other movements when you're trying to learn new skills. So stick to the basics, learn the basic aspects of strength training first, before you start to dabble too much in accessory or supplementary movements. In the spirit of streamlining and minimizing your training, I'd also recommend keeping a very conservative exercise selection. An appropriate strength program for a healthy, able-bodied beginner should only really require like 5 to 7 total exercises tops. More on this later, but if you're getting into like dozens and dozens of different exercises in your program, you're A, probably not training for strength, and B, definitely overdoing it as a beginner. I'd really recommend simplifying your set and rep schemes as well, finding something consistent, moderate, and easy to progress. My best suggestion here would be to do between 3 and 5 sets of 5 on your basic compound movements as a beginner. This kind of puts you in a nice sweet spot between finding an appropriately taxing load and completing enough reps to really develop the motor learning that we talked about earlier. Don't worry too much about like top end singles or rep maxes yet. Consistently progress the way you can use on your working sets in the 3 to 5 set, 5 rep range when you're just getting started. I'd also really recommend that folks do as little as possible for as long as possible while still driving adaptation and progress. We can sort of think of this as a minimum effective dose. So a lot of lifters, not just beginners, they have a real tendency to try and ride this very thin line of training as much as possible, as hard as possible, without having adverse effects, or finding an amount that is manageable for them to do. In general, I think folks should try to flip this idea on its head a little bit. It's not a very productive paradigm for us to train under, but that applies even more aggressively for new lifters. Instead, what I would recommend would be to try and do as little as possible while still making progress. We're looking for the minimum effective dose of training. Maximally effective doses are not necessarily going to provide maximal results, and will probably provide shorter term results than you're really looking for as a beginner. As a beginner or someone who's new to training after a long layoff, like we mentioned earlier, you're really looking to stretch this out as long as possible and make those good beginner gains for as long as possible. There's no real need to slow down your progress sooner than you have to. So by starting with a minimum effective dose, this does allow us to progress for a longer period. Progress will continue for a longer period, and it'll allow you to really take advantage of more complicated program designs later on. Trying to make the most of a complicated program when you have no need for it, it's completely unnecessary. I can't even think of a good analogy for it. It's sort of just a trying to run before you can walk situation. You're going to get so much more out of minimum effective dose simple program for now. And also by jumping into those complicated programs too quickly, you're sort of setting yourself up to fail later on when you might actually need to start to employ some of those strategies, but you've already milked them when you didn't have to. So start with the simplest progress you can make. There's really no need for a beginner strength trainer to be in the gym more than 3 times a week. Very seldom would, I guess right now, if you're locked into a situation where your gym only allows 45-minute or 1-hour time slots, it would be a possibility that you'd have to carve your training up a little bit more. But if you have an hour, 75, even 90 minutes on the top end to train 3 times a week is much more than enough. There's definitely no need for beginners to be in the gym more often than that. And very seldom would you need to be performing more than just a few movements per session either. So the idea of a minimum effective dose also applies when it comes to getting yourself unstuck and moving your numbers up further. So as a beginner, we talked about a very moderate, simple rep scheme, like 3 to 5 sets of 5. And ideally what you would do would be to add some load to that every session for as long as possible. I'm going to break down a bit more of a sample program, what I would like to see you guys do later on. But you will reach a point when those increases are no longer possible. So, I have a bad tendency for this myself, but let's say you're trucking along 3 sets of 5, everything's going great. You're adding 5 pounds per session to your squat. You get to a point where that's no longer possible. Your sets start to look like 5, 5, 4. 5, 4, 3, you're not making the full 5 over time. How do we get unstuck from this situation and move the progress along further? Well, minimum effective dose applies here too. What I would want you guys to do would be to make the smallest change possible to continue to drive progress. So rather than completely throwing everything out, change only one variable. So this could be reducing reps, increasing sets, reducing rest time, increasing rest time. And by only changing just one small thing, and I'll kind of get into how we can manipulate that for a new lifter, change just one thing at a time, and once again, it will allow you to make slow and steady progress for a longer period, which is sort of the whole point. You don't want to shortchange yourself and get to a point where you're not making perfectly linear progress anymore. You throw the whole thing out. Now that period was a bit of a waste. So I would just recommend to make small, consistent progress for as long as possible without really getting greedy and overdoing it. Beginners are often in a position to make progress every single session. The key to this, though, is to make as little progress as possible every session for as long as possible. So if you try to add 20 pounds to your bench press every session, that'll probably last 1 session. What you need to do is to make the smallest increase to your 3 sets of 5 every time you do it. So for the lower body movements, you're probably looking at 5 pounds, unless you are a very strong beginner, which does happen. And then you would maybe look to make a 2.5 pound increase as you go. The upper body lifts can start at 5 pounds and then benefit much more from using a 2.5 pound jump. This will allow you to make consistent small gains for a long time, which really, really adds up quickly after a few weeks. So do not get greedy and try to move up too soon. Just use a minimum effective dose and make the minimum increase possible as you go. So when it comes to strength, most everyone is going to recommend sort of the basic and practical barbell training. It's going to fit most, if not all, of the criteria we discussed above. So why would we use the barbell, especially for beginners? It provides constant feedback and infinite opportunity for progression. The barbell allows for incremental loading, which dumbbells, kettlebells don't. We can add a very small load as we go. So it's much easier for us to track progress and for us to tweak our intensity when the bar is so infinitely adjustable. It's a very clear and objective measure of our progress as well. If the weight on the bar is constantly going up in the same rep range, then the trainee is obviously increasing their strength. So with all that said, guys, what exactly would this program look like? What would I want it to look like for you guys? Generally, I would recommend beginner strength trainees and recreational exercisers who are new to strength to start with a simple 3-day per week program that addresses some of the main movements in the practical barbell program. Beginners don't benefit at all from training complexity, as we discussed above, and ideally I'd like novices to have 2 distinct sessions that they perform on a 3-day rotating schedule. So ideally that would be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It could be a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. It could be a Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. Anything that gives at least 1 day of rest with a 2-day of rest every now and then. So Friday, Sunday, Tuesday would also be fine. Monday, Wednesday, Friday fits a lot of people's schedules best. If you're very busy during the week, I would recommend doing like a Friday, Sunday, and then either Tuesday or Wednesday would work great. Really any combination that results in at least a day of rest with the occasional 2-day rest is acceptable. So you have 2 distinct sessions here. Each one would be only 3 movements to start. We're going to classify them as A and B for now. So your A session would be back squat, 3 to 5 sets of 5, overhead press, 3 to 5 sets of 5, and a deadlifting pattern for 3 to 5 sets of 5. Your day B, very similarly, would be back squat, 3 to 5 sets of 5, bench press, 3 to 5 sets of 5, and then a lat machine movement or pull-ups or chin-ups for 3 sets. Reps vary on that. We're going to chat about that in a minute. So super bare bones, very sparse, meets all the criteria we talked about above. And how would we progress this? So that's the whole point, right? We're trying to add weight to the bar. We're talking about strength training. We need to be moving more load. Load is representative of our strength. The more load we're adding, the stronger we're getting. So for the squatting and pressing movements, it would be the back squat, the overhead press, and the bench press. I would start you guys at 3 sets of 5 reps. That's working sets. You'd have maybe 3 sets to warm up before that. And then we would look to linearly add load to those for as long as possible. As we mentioned above, we'd be looking for probably 5 pounds on the squat, maybe 2.5 pounds if you're quite strong already, and 2.5 pounds for the bench press and the overhead press. So when you're first starting out, you'll probably just be trucking along doing your 3 sets of 5, adding this for as long as possible. This is a good place to be, right? 2.5 or 5 pounds may not seem like a lot, but I guarantee you it will add up very fast. If you have access to 1.25 plates, you will need those to make the 2.5 pound jumps. If your gym doesn't have 1.25 pound plates, I'd recommend you buy your own. They're very cheap and they will extend your progress for a long time. If your gym doesn't have 1.25s or 2.5s, you'll have to buy 2.5s. You definitely won't be able to make 10 pound jumps with 5s per side for very long. So anyway, three sets of 5. When this becomes unfeasible, I'd recommend shifting one of the squatting days to a lighter day. The one that I would adjust would be day A, which is the day that you deadlift as well. So the first adjustment we would make to keep the squat moving along would be to take the A session and perform it at 20, maybe even 25% less load than you're performing on the B session. So if this were someone who maybe they had pushed their, they're still squatting heavy on both sessions. They do A, B, A week 1, B, A, B week 2, A, B, A, repeating, and they get to a point where they're up to, let's say, 300 pounds for 3 sets of 5 on the squat for both days. They get stuck. So they try to do 305 and they get 5-5-4. The next week they try again and it's even worse, they get 5-4-3. So they're obviously now accumulating a little too much fatigue, they're not able to recover from it, and it's starting to impede their progress. So the first measure that we would take to change this would be to take the day A squat down by 20, maybe even 25% for someone very strong. So in our scenario of a 300 pound 3x5 squatter, we would be looking at somewhere between 225 and 240 for 3 sets of 5. If you are accustomed to doing 300 every single time you train, this would be very easy, and it should allow a little bit extra recovery to keep that B day squat moving along a bit more. The reason we would want to do the light day paired on day A with the deadlift is because there is some interference in localized musculature there where if you're failing on your squatting, it will probably be impacting your deadlifting. So taking the light squat on the deadlift day and allowing the B day squat where you have the lat movement instead to keep progressing would be my suggestion there. Now you will get to a point where even that becomes unfeasible. So what I would do in this situation, maybe I would start to just move the light day. It's not necessarily every A day, but it's the middle day. So on your 3-day pattern, if it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, your light session always happens on the Wednesday, and now you have Monday and Friday as heavy days in the same 3x5 pattern. This would give you the whole weekend off before you have to go heavy again. Doing the light day every A day can be a little too light for some folks. Now that I think of it, you might actually want to first do the light day as the middle day, then if that becomes unrealistic, do it on the A day. So this should allow the heavy day progress to continue for quite a while, especially if you're eating enough and sleeping enough. Once the heavy day has stalled, you have a couple options. So one thing you could do would be to increase the sets on the heavy day. So move from your 3 sets of 5 up to 4 sets of 5, same load, 5 sets of 5 for the same load on your next heavy day. At this point, if you can perform 5 sets of 5, let's say we'll use the 300 pound example again, you can certainly do 305 for 3 sets of 5. So once that becomes too taxing and is no longer possible, you might be ready for a more complicated program. You might just be under-resting, under-recovering. There's a couple other strategies you can still employ here. So 5 sets of 5 and then dropping some fatigue, moving back to the 3 sets of 5, that can be pretty taxing. If you find that time-consuming and a little too hard, you can manipulate the intensity instead. So another option for getting unstuck and squeezing out a bit more progress on your heavy days would be to perform your standard 3 sets of 5, but at varying loads across a bit of a spectrum here. So you would perform your first set of 5 at the heavy weight. In our example, it would be 305 because we're trying to move up to 300. Then you would take 5-10% off for your remaining 2 sets. So you would go down to maybe 285, maybe as low as 270, depending on how much that first set is taxing you. For your remaining 2 sets. Next time you would aim to perform 2 sets at the heavier load, so 2 sets at 305 and just 1 at 285. The next session you would try to do them all across at 305. Or you could even just progress the last set a little bit if you didn't feel quite ready for it and do 305, 305, 290 or 295. This is much slower progress than adding 5 pounds every session, obviously, but it is still a bit of linear progress. You're still squeaking out a little bit more each session, which is really what beginner training is all about. If you're really looking to make the most of your beginner progress, I would recommend squeezing that out for as long as possible. Once you get to a point where you can't really squeeze that out anymore, you're probably ready to move on to a more complex program at that point. So as I mentioned, if you have access to weight plates that are as small as 1 1/4 pounds, you're probably going to make pretty consistent progress for the bench or the overhead press. If your gym doesn't have those, I would really recommend you buy them. In terms of the bench and the overhead press, so they occur at half the frequency of the squat. You would be squatting every session. bench and the overhead press are alternating. So some weeks you would perform 2 bench sessions, some weeks you would perform 2 overhead press sessions. So because of this, and because the nature of the overhead press is that it's much lighter than the bench press, you should not require a load reduced light day at any point. The way that we would be adjusting one of the squat days to be a bit lighter to drive progress on the other one. You would kind of constantly get that from the overhead press. And if you do have the small plates, they should be moving along pretty consistently. So you don't really need the light day if you have correct rotation on the bench and the press. You could go use these strategies of increasing sets or varying loads to move those along. So you could do the 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 sets, and then back to 3 sets progression, or you could do the drop set progression of doing a heavy set and then doing some reduced sets after that. And once again, just like on squat, if you get to a point where you're doing varying loads for your 3 sets and you're still not making progress week to week, you're probably ready to move on. So we got 2 movements left to cover. Each session is basically structured as a squatting movement, a pressing movement, and a pulling movement. The pulling movements don't really play by the same rules as the others at all. Even the squatting and the pressing, they don't really play by the same rules either. So when it comes to deadlifting, a lot of folks want to perform like a conventional powerlifting style deadlift. My preference would actually be for them to perform like a Romanian deadlift, stiff-legged deadlift hybrid kind of movement, like a really pure hinge pattern with a 5x5 rep scheme that would alternate between 5 sets building, so each set becoming progressively heavier and ending on a single hard set of 5. That would be one of your options for your deadlifting movement. And then your next session would be performed as a light set of 5 to warm up, a medium set of 5 to warm up, and 3 challenging sets of 5 at the same weight. So that one looks and feels a lot more like what you would do on the other movements, right? It would be your 3x5. What's different here though is I would encourage you guys to not necessarily track the progress of your 3x5 as much as you do on the squatting and the pressing movements, and to instead track your progress on the top set of 5 from the 5x5 day. Use your 3x5 on the deadlift more as an unloading and to build your single set of 5. Deadlifting is pretty taxing, especially if you're going to be doing it after squatting, especially if you're going to be squatting every session, and especially if there are sessions or weeks where you're going to be deadlifting twice a week. So track your top set of 5, but use your 3-set day to alleviate some stress on those muscle groups and on that pattern. For the 3 sets of 5 day, you would probably be targeting, we'll say 10 to 15% less than you would for your heavy set of 5 day. This will keep you from pulling heavy twice a week, so even on the weeks you deadlift twice, it won't be heavy, it won't be light. And progress that for as long as possible. A lot of the same strategies apply from, obviously the adding sets strategy would only apply to the 3 sets of 5 day. If you get to a point where your heavy set day is not moving along anymore, the strategies of adjusting the intensity and the volume aren't really there because you're only doing 1 working set. So instead what I would do on that day would actually just be to take a big step back. So take a step back so you take 2 forward kind of thing. Go down in weight on that day by maybe 10-15% and build your way back up. You could, I suppose, use some of the strategies we talked about for the squatting and the press on your 3 sets of 5 day for the deadlift. Your mileage may vary on that. Honestly, I haven't messed around with it too much, but you can give it a try if you get stuck there. So on the B day, you guys have an upper body pulling movement via either a lat machine or pull-ups, chin-ups. And here is where we're going to start to get away from our sets of 5 a little bit. Higher reps are a little more appropriate here. So if you're using a lat machine, my preference would be a wide grip, sort of just shoulder grip, lat pull down. And you would be doing 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps. For progression on that, first session I would just find a weight that's challenging for 3 sets of 8. Next time try to do 3 sets of 10. Next time try to do 3 sets of 12. and then cycle back to 3 sets of 8, move the pin up 1 further. For trainees who are able to perform pull-ups and chin-ups, things are a little more complicated. First thing you would do would be to perform 3 sets of max reps. Maybe just leave 1 in the tank or so. This only really applies to folks who can do at least a few reps per set. If your 3 sets of max reps are 2, 1, and 1, you should probably be able to let pull down. But if your 3 sets of max reps is at least like 5, 5, 4, or like 6, 4, 3 or something, I would stick to the pull-ups and chin-ups. So perform 3 sets of max reps. This would be every B day, until you can get to 3 sets of maybe 10 or 12. At that point, you may, but you don't have to. You could move to 3 sets of 5 and use the same progression that you would use on the bench and the overhead press. So 3 sets of 5 weighted pull-ups would be a possibility for you at that point. And you would use the 2.5 pound increases on that as well. That would behave much like the bench and the overhead press. Your progress would be quite slow. And if you do get to a point using a very bare bones model like this, that you're able to perform 3 sets of 5 weighted pull-ups, what I would do for you on your B session would be to alternate a bodyweight day and a weighted day. So stick to your 3 sets of max reps bodyweight one day, and then the other day you can progress your 3x5 by 2.5 pounds per session. I guess the same strategies to get unstuck would apply there as well. Folks who are unable to perform pull-ups and chin-ups should just stick to the lat machine until they're strong enough to do them, or they have the appropriate body composition to do them. So I get that this is a pretty sparse bare bones model for you guys, but remember, as a beginner, you are in a position to make progress very rapidly for a long time, as long as you commit to the process of making the progress slow, or not slow, gradual, incremental, right? Make the smallest increase you can for as long as possible. Older lifters or folks who are more seasoned in lifting are very jealous that you guys are in this position. Make the most of it. Stick to something really, really basic like this. Don't worry too much about flashy assistance work or getting too far into exercise variations or piling on tons of movements. Rather than just do the minimum effective dose, recover as hard as you can until the next session, do your linear progress, and ride that out for as long as possible. I have a couple other lectures on here in terms of sleep. So sleep is huge, even for beginners. You guys need to sleep a lot if you're going to be trying to make linear progress. And then another lecture on sort of some general strength training tips that has a good recovery section in it. So if you guys are interested, if this is interesting for you, I would encourage you to watch those, pick up some other tips. Stick to a simple A, B, A, B, A, B format as long as you can. Really reap the rewards of a simple program. It may seem sparse or even a little boring, but if you're committed to the process of strength, you can really commit to this and make the most of your training for a short period. If you want to see your numbers move up quickly, I would really recommend a basic approach like this. It'll take you a long way if you pair it with caloric surplus and lots of rest. So good luck to you guys with your lifting in the new year. Try to progress your lifts for as long as possible. Think about some of the stuff we talked about today. Check out the other lectures, and feel free to follow us here on PSP to get some more training tips and workout ideas for you at home.
PSP Kingston, the health and wellness provider for the military community.